I was standing on my porch in Clearwater Ridge, Texas, when everything finally exploded. In front of me was a solid steel gate, locked tight, and behind it stretched a growing line of luxury SUVs and pickup trucks, bumper to bumper. Nearly 100 wedding guests sat trapped in their vehicles, dressed in formal clothes, confused, angry, and staring straight at my property like I had personally ruined their day. Some were honking. Others were shouting. Phones were already out. Then she showed up. HOA President Sharon Bell stormed up to my gate, red-faced, pointing at my security camera, screaming that I was breaking the law. She kept yelling, "I have rights," over and over, insisting I was illegally blocking community access to her lake. What she did not know was that the road, the land, and the lake were built by my grandfather decades before her HOA ever existed. For years, she had tried to take control of it through fake violations, intimidation, and endless threats. And this time, she thought she had won. What Sharon never realized was that I did not stop her daughter's massive lakeside engagement party by accident. I let her plan it. I let her invite the whole town. And I let her walk straight into a legal trap she could not scream her way out of. Because every threat, every letter, and every act of harassment was documented, and this time it all happened in public. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? A few weeks earlier, my life looked very different. My name is Ethan Cole, and until recently, I was an engineer who thought he had things mostly figured out. Then the layoffs hit. One day I was designing systems and planning my next decade, and the next I was staring at severance paperwork, trying to stretch savings and pretending I was not panicking. That was when my grandfather's will finally went through. He left me his lakefront property in Clearwater Ridge, Texas. It was not just a house. It was a piece of his life. The main home sat slightly elevated above the water, built solid and simple. There was a guest cabin he used when family visited, an old wooden dock that had been repaired more times than I could count, and most importantly, a paved access road that cut through the land and led toward the newer subdivision nearby, Clearwater Ridge Estates. My grandfather built that road himself decades ago, back when the surrounding land was nothing but brush and dirt. The subdivision came much later. At first, I thought inheriting the property was a blessing, a place to regroup, a place with history, a place that might even help me financially if I ever needed to sell or rent part of it. That illusion lasted about 3 weeks. One afternoon, while I was still unpacking boxes and fixing small things around the house, a woman I had never met marched up my driveway with 2 other people behind her. She carried a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. She did not introduce herself politely. She did not ask how I was settling in. She simply announced herself as Sharon Bell, the president of the Clearwater Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Her tone was confident, rehearsed, and cold. She started pointing toward the lake, talking about community standards and shared amenities. According to her, the lake was considered a community feature, and I was now required to pay HOA dues, maintenance fees, and allow scheduled access for residents. I told her calmly that the property was private, that it had been in my family long before the HOA existed, and that I was not part of her association. I even showed her the old boundary markers and paperwork my grandfather had kept. She smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they think you are either lying or too ignorant to know better. Within days, the letters started arriving. Official-looking envelopes warning me about violations that made no sense. Claims that my dock was not compliant. Accusations that I was restricting access to commonly used areas. Each letter ended with vague language about fines, legal action, and further enforcement. Every time I responded politely, the tone escalated. Sharon stopped pretending this was a misunderstanding. She started implying that fighting the HOA would be expensive, stressful, and bad for my reputation. She hinted that previous owners had found it easier to cooperate. That was when I met Walter Hayes. Walter lived a few houses down, closer to the edge of the subdivision. He was older, quiet, and the kind of neighbor who watched more than he spoke. One evening, he waved me over while I was checking my mail. After making sure no one else was nearby, he told me I should be careful. He said Sharon had done this before. According to Walter, I was not the first person she had targeted. He told me about other landowners who had property near the lake before the subdivision was built. People who suddenly found themselves buried under violations, inspections, and pressure. People who eventually sold, not because they wanted to, but because they could not take the stress anymore. The properties were always bought cheaply, and somehow, months later, they were flipped for serious money. That conversation changed everything. Up until that moment, I still believed there might be a reasonable explanation. A paperwork error, a misunderstanding of boundaries. But listening to Walter, I realized something unsettling. Sharon was not confused. She was consistent. This was not about rules. It was about control. And once I understood that, every interaction with the HOA felt different. The letters were not warnings. They were weapons. The smiles were not friendly. They were calculated. And the pressure was not accidental. It was deliberate. Standing there with my grandfather's house behind me and a clipboard tyrant trying to rewrite history in front of me, I realized I was not just dealing with an annoying HOA president. I was dealing with someone who had done this before. And if Walter was right, she would not stop until I either broke or fought back. The moment Sharon realized I was not going to fold, everything changed. The tone shifted from passive pressure to outright aggression, and it happened almost overnight. The first certified letter arrived on a Monday morning, stamped urgent and written to look as intimidating as possible. According to the HOA, I was allegedly operating an illegal short-term rental on my property. They demanded immediate proof, threatened fines, and warned of escalated enforcement if I failed to comply. The problem was simple. I was not renting anything. No listings, no guests, no income. It was a complete fabrication. I responded in writing, calmly, with documentation, thinking logic would shut it down. Instead, it lit a fuse. 2 days later, at just after 5 in the morning, someone pounded on my front door. When I opened it, a uniformed deputy stood on my porch. He introduced himself as Rick Bell. The last name did not escape me. He said they had received an anonymous report about possible drug activity and wanted to conduct a welfare check. I knew exactly where it came from. Rick was professional on the surface, but the message was clear. He looked around slowly, asked pointed questions, and made a show of checking his notes. Nothing came of it, of course, but the damage was done. A police car in my driveway before sunrise sends a message, even when no laws are broken. That visit was not the last. The welfare checks became a pattern. Different days, different excuses, suspicious smells, unusual traffic, noise complaints that made no sense because no one was there but me. Each time, Rick or another deputy showed up, clipboard in hand, pretending it was routine. I stopped assuming good faith and started documenting everything. I installed additional security cameras. I saved every letter. I logged dates, times, badge numbers, and reasons for each visit. I recorded conversations when legally allowed. If someone knocked, it went into a file. If a vehicle slowed near my property, I wrote it down. I treated the situation like a system under stress, because that is exactly what it was. Then the inspectors arrived. First, it was Environmental Services responding to an anonymous complaint about possible water contamination. They tested the lake and found nothing. Next came a noise complaint during the middle of a weekday afternoon when I was using basic power tools to repair a fence. Then building enforcement showed up, questioning structures that had been standing for decades, suddenly claiming permits might be required retroactively. Every visit ended the same way: no violations, no findings, no action taken. But they kept coming. At the same time, Sharon went public. She flooded the neighborhood social group with vague posts about concerning activity near the lake and reminders to report anything that feels off. She never used my name, but she did not have to. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. Comments started appearing about safety, property values, and protecting the community. I could feel the eyes on me whenever I drove into town. The worst part was the psychological toll. I stopped sleeping well. Every unexpected sound made my chest tighten. I kept my phone nearby at all times, half expecting another knock at the door. Anger sat just under the surface, but so did something worse: the constant grinding feeling of being watched and judged for no reason. I tried, once more, to resolve it directly. I asked Sharon for a meeting. I brought documents, property records, surveys, proof that I was not part of the HOA and never had been. I explained that the harassment needed to stop. She listened without interrupting, nodded occasionally, and then leaned back in her chair. She told me, calmly, that cooperation would make my life easier. She suggested that legal fights were expensive. She said the community expected certain standards, and resisting them rarely ended well. She did not threaten me outright. She did not need to. The message was clear: submit or suffer. That was the moment it fully sank in. This was not about rules. It was not about safety. It was not about misunderstandings or paperwork. Sharon wanted control. She wanted me tired, isolated, and desperate enough to give up land my family had owned for generations. And the more I tried to be reasonable, the more aggressive she became. By the end of that month, I no longer felt like a homeowner enjoying his inheritance. I felt like prey, like I was being slowly boxed in from all sides by paperwork, authority, and rumor. But there was one thing Sharon underestimated. I was done trying to make peace with someone who thrived on pressure. And if she wanted a fight built on documentation, patterns, and proof, she had just picked the wrong person to push. I stopped sleeping after the third welfare check. Not because I was afraid of the deputies, but because my mind would not shut off. Something about the whole situation felt off in a way that went beyond harassment. Sharon was too confident, too precise. She was acting like someone who already believed the ending was decided. So one night, instead of lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I went down into my grandfather's old study. The room had not been touched in years. Filing cabinets lined one wall, drawers labeled in my grandfather's careful handwriting. Deeds, surveys, correspondence, things I'd skimmed before but never really studied. I started opening everything, one folder at a time, laying papers out across the desk and floor. That was when I found the survey. It was old, yellowed at the edges, dated decades before Clearwater Ridge estates even existed. At first glance, it looked like just another boundary map, but when I traced the lines carefully, my stomach dropped. The access road, the only paved road leading into the subdivision. It did not belong to the HOA. It cut straight across my grandfather's land. I double-checked the measurements. Then I checked again. The road had been built by my grandfather as a private access route long before any subdivision was planned. There was no properly recorded easement granting permanent access to future homeowners. No transfer, no agreement. Nothing. That meant something huge. For years, the HOA had been using that road as if it were theirs, without legal authority. And Sharon, of all people, absolutely knew it. That explained her urgency. That explained the pressure. If I ever challenged it formally, her entire power base collapsed. I did not act on it immediately. I kept digging. Buried deeper in the files was something even more important. A thick envelope labeled State Water Agreement. Inside were documents I had never seen before. My grandfather had negotiated exclusive recreational use rights to the lake under a state-level agreement tied to water management and conservation rules. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. The lake was private, not just owned, protected. Any large gathering, any commercial or community use, any organized event required the express consent of the property owner. Those rights predated the subdivision by decades and were reaffirmed multiple times over the years. I sat there staring at the papers, feeling something I had not felt in weeks: calm. The next morning, I contacted a water rights specialist named Dr. Elaine Porter. She reviewed everything carefully, line by line, without reacting. When she finally looked up, she nodded once and said something I will never forget. "These are some of the strongest private recreational water rights I have seen. They are clean, they are old, and they are enforceable." I asked her what that meant in practical terms. She said it meant the HOA had no claim to the lake. None. No implied access. No community use. No legal workaround. And if someone tried to assert rights anyway, it would not just fail, it would backfire. She also confirmed what I already suspected about the road. Long-term use alone did not magically create ownership, especially when objections and documentation existed. And I had plenty of both. That meeting changed how I saw everything. For weeks, I had been reacting, answering letters, responding to inspections, defending myself against accusations that were never real. I was always one step behind, trying to prove I was not doing something wrong. Now I understood the truth. I was not the one on shaky ground. Sharon was. She was bluffing with authority she did not have, hoping I would never dig deep enough to see it. And the harder she pushed, the more obvious it became that she was trying to run out the clock before I figured it out. I went home and reorganized my entire approach. I stopped calling. I stopped explaining. I stopped trying to reason with someone who did not care about reason. Instead, I created folders, timelines, evidence logs. Every letter from the HOA went into a binder. Every inspection notice got scanned and indexed. Every welfare check was documented alongside my objections. I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. If Sharon wanted a public narrative, she would get one. If she wanted witnesses, I would make sure there were plenty. If she wanted to escalate, I would let her. Because now I knew something she did not. The road she depended on was mine. The lake she claimed was never hers. And the rights she kept screaming about did not exist outside her own imagination. For the first time since this all started, the pressure reversed direction. I was no longer waiting for the next move. I was planning it. The first real act of sabotage happened on a quiet night, the kind where the lake is so still it looks like glass. I woke up just after sunrise to a strange sight outside my window. Part of my dock was sitting lower in the water than it should have been. One of the support beams had been cleanly cut, not rotted, not broken by weather, cut. I stood there staring at it, feeling that slow burn of anger crawl up my spine. This was no accident. Someone had gone out there deliberately, in the dark, with tools. Less than 2 hours later, Sharon Bell showed up. She pulled into my driveway like she had been invited, stepping out of her SUV with an expression of exaggerated concern. She clucked her tongue, shook her head, and said how awful it was that vandals were becoming such a problem near the lake. She even suggested, with a straight face, that maybe I should consider allowing HOA oversight for safety reasons. I thanked her for her concern and told her I would handle it. What I did not tell her was that the new cameras were already installed. After the welfare check started, I had upgraded everything. High-resolution trail cameras along the shoreline, motion-activated night cameras covering the dock, overlapping angles, redundancy. If someone stepped foot on my property, I would know. 3 nights later, the cameras paid for themselves. At just before midnight, one of the alerts went off. I opened the footage and felt my jaw tighten. The person creeping along the dock was young, too young to be subtle. The hood slipped back for just a moment, and the face was unmistakable. It was Sharon's son. He moved with the confidence of someone who had been told there would be no consequences. He damaged another section of the dock, laughed, and left the way he came. The footage was clear, multiple angles, time-stamped. I printed still frames and made copies of the video. Then I requested a meeting. When I showed Sharon the footage, something strange happened. She did not panic. She did not apologize. She did not even look surprised. She stared at the screen, scoffed, and said the videos were fake. She accused me of editing them, then pivoted instantly into outrage. She said I was harassing her family. She said I was targeting her child. She threatened to call the police and claim I was stalking a minor. That was the moment I fully understood who I was dealing with. Truth did not matter to Sharon. Reality did not matter, only control. Within days, the smear campaign intensified. Posts appeared online warning neighbors about dangerous behavior near my property. Sharon spoke openly about protecting children and community safety, carefully framing herself as the victim and me as the threat. People who had never spoken to me suddenly avoided eye contact at the store. What Sharon did not know was that she had already made a mistake. One of her closest allies in the HOA, Megan Price, had approached me weeks earlier. Megan was friendly, talkative, and deeply involved in Sharon's inner circle. She was also quietly frustrated with how Sharon ran things. I never asked her to spy. I simply listened. When Megan realized what Sharon was trying to do to me, she offered help on her own terms. At my suggestion, she continued feeding Sharon harmless but misleading information. Dates that were slightly off, assumptions that were wrong, confidence where caution should have existed. Sharon believed she was 10 steps ahead. She was not. Around that time, Walter introduced me to Laura Bennett. Laura was a retired federal prosecutor who had moved to the area for a quieter life. When I explained the situation, she did not interrupt. She listened, asked pointed questions, and reviewed my documentation with unsettling focus. When I finished, she leaned back and said something that reframed everything. "This is not HOA drama," she said. "This is organized intimidation using authority, family connections, and coordinated pressure to force a financial outcome." She explained that Sharon's actions followed patterns she had seen before. Abuse of process, weaponizing inspections, creating a public narrative to isolate the target, using plausible deniability through anonymous complaints. Laura agreed to help. Together, we began assembling the case properly. Not emotionally, not reactively, methodically. We created timelines linking inspections to HOA actions. We organized the welfare checks alongside Sharon's letters. We cataloged the sabotage, the footage, the false accusations. Every piece alone looked annoying. Together, they told a very clear story. Laura's advice was simple and unsettling. Do not confront Sharon again. Do not threaten legal action. Do not try to clear my name publicly. Let her keep going, because people who believe they are untouchable always push too far. And Sharon was already sprinting toward a line she did not realize existed. Sharon made her next move in public, and the moment I heard about it, I knew exactly what she was trying to do. The announcement went out through the neighborhood group and email lists like it was a victory lap. Sharon proudly shared that her daughter's engagement party would be held at the lake. Not near it, not adjacent to it. At it. She framed it as a community celebration, thanking neighbors in advance for supporting shared access and encouraging everyone to come enjoy the evening. It was not subtle. This was her attempt to manufacture proof. If enough people gathered at the lake under her direction, she could later claim It had always been used by the community. Witnesses. Photos, social posts. Normalized trespass, dressed up as tradition. When I showed the announcement to Laura, I expected her to tell me to shut it down immediately, to send a cease and desist or call the county. Instead, she smiled. "Do not stop her," she said. "Let her commit fully." She explained that Sharon was building her own trap. The more public, organized, and deliberate the event became, the harder it would be for her to deny intent later. This was not a misunderstanding. It was planned encroachment, so we prepared. Laura filed formal records requests with the county, requesting communications related to my property, the lake, and the HOA. What came back was worse than I expected. Emails between officials discussing continued pressure and regulatory leverage. Conversations that should never have existed in the first place. It confirmed what we already suspected. Sharon was not acting alone. She was nudging people in authority to make my life uncomfortable, hoping I would give up before anyone looked too closely. At the same time, Walter's nephew, Officer Noah Hayes, reached out quietly. He was a deputy in a neighboring jurisdiction not connected to Sharon's family. He told me that Rick Bell was already under internal review for multiple complaints, patterns of overreach, unusual frequency of welfare checks tied to personal connections. Nothing public yet. But it was coming. Everything was aligning. That was when we moved on the physical side of the plan. The access road was the key. It crossed my land, and legally, I had the right to control it. Laura insisted that everything be done perfectly. Surveys updated, notices sent, permits pulled where required, no shortcuts. The gate itself was not decorative. It was a reinforced steel barrier, professionally installed at the exact property boundary. Remote controlled, logged, documented. It was impossible to mistake for anything but a lawful assertion of ownership. I did not announce it. I did not warn Sharon. I let her continue planning under the assumption that nothing would change. The night before the party, I walked the property alone. The lake was quiet. The dock had been repaired. The cameras were active. The gate stood ready. For weeks, Sharon had tried to corner me in private. Letters, inspections, smears. This time, the confrontation would happen in daylight, with witnesses she invited herself. I slept better that night than I had in months. Because for the first time, I was not bracing for impact. I was waiting for her to arrive. And when she did, she would not be able to scream her way around the truth, the paperwork, or the steel gate standing exactly where it was supposed to be. The morning of the engagement party arrived clear and bright, the kind of day Sharon would have taken as a good omen. I was awake early, watching the cameras from my kitchen table as the first vehicles began to arrive. One by one, luxury SUVs and polished trucks turned down the access road, decorations visible through the windows, people laughing and checking directions on their phones. And then they stopped. The steel gate stood exactly where it had the day before, closed and locked. Confusion spread fast. Cars idled. Drivers stepped out, looking around like they had made a wrong turn. Within minutes, the road began to back up. Vehicles lined the shoulder, stretching farther than I could see from the camera angle. Some guests walked up to the gate and tried to peer through it. Others pulled out their phones. A few started calling someone, clearly asking why they were being blocked from a party they had been told was ready and waiting. That was when Sharon arrived. She pulled up fast, parked crookedly, and stormed straight to the gate. She did not knock. She did not call. She went directly to the camera and began shouting, pointing, and gesturing wildly. She yelled that this was illegal, that she had rights, that I could not block community access. She demanded I open the gate immediately or face consequences. Her voice carried. Guests began to gather behind her, drawn by the spectacle. Someone started recording. I did not rush outside. I let it unfold. Sharon tried calling the county. She tried calling the sheriff's office. Each time, she grew more frantic. The confidence she usually carried like armor began to crack. She kept repeating the same lines, louder each time, as if volume could turn fiction into law. About 20 minutes into the chaos, a familiar car pulled up behind the line of guests. A local reporter stepped out, camera over her shoulder. She had been tipped off earlier that morning. Sharon noticed her immediately and shifted tactics, suddenly playing the victim, loudly explaining how a hostile homeowner was ruining a family celebration. That was my cue. I walked down to the gate with Laura beside me, calm and unhurried, carrying a folder thick enough to speak for itself. The crowd quieted when they saw us. Sharon turned, already mid-accusation, and froze when she recognized Laura. Laura did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She simply introduced herself and asked if the county representative on the phone would like to see the documents confirming property boundaries, water rights, and the absence of any recorded easement. Within minutes, the tone changed. A county official arrived on site, visibly uncomfortable. Laura handed over the survey first. The official reviewed it, asked a few questions, and then nodded. The access road crossed private land. There was no recorded easement granting HOA or public use. Then Laura produced the water rights agreement. The official's expression hardened. These were not ambiguous documents. They were old, clear, and binding. The lake was private. Organized gatherings required owner consent. None had been given. Sharon tried to interrupt. She tried to argue. She claimed long-term use. She claimed tradition. She claimed authority. Each claim collapsed under the weight of paper and signatures that predated her entire subdivision. The reporter captured everything. Sharon's voice rose again, but this time it sounded shrill, panicked. She accused me of ambushing her. She accused the county of favoritism. She accused everyone except herself. Guests began murmuring. Some looked embarrassed. Others angry. A few quietly turned back toward their cars. The final blow came when the county official stated, clearly and publicly, that Sharon had no legal right to host the event at the lake and that continued attempts to force access could result in penalties. Sharon stood there, mouth open, her authority evaporating in real time. The woman who once bullied people behind closed doors now had nowhere to hide. Cameras, witnesses, and documents surrounded her. Every trick she relied on failed the moment it faced daylight. One by one, guests left. Sharon stayed, staring at the gate like it had personally betrayed her. Her carefully constructed image lay in pieces at her feet. And for the first time since this all began, she had no one left to threaten. The fallout did not take long, but it was thorough. Within days of the engagement party disaster, the story spread well beyond Clearwater Ridge estates. Clips of Sharon screaming at my gate circulated online. The reporter segment aired locally, and suddenly the narrative Sharon had spent years controlling was no longer hers. Neighbors who had only heard whispers were now watching documented proof of what had actually been happening. The HOA emergency meeting was called less than a week later. Sharon tried to hold on to her position. She claimed she had been misled. She blamed misunderstandings, legal technicalities, and even suggested I had orchestrated everything to embarrass her. But the documents were already circulating among homeowners. The lack of an easement, the water rights, the emails Laura had obtained through records requests. It was impossible to explain away. She was removed as HOA president by a majority vote. That was only the beginning. Once Sharon lost her position, the protection she had built around herself vanished. Complaints that had gone nowhere suddenly resurfaced. The county opened formal investigations into how inspections and welfare checks had been triggered. Rick Bell was quietly placed on administrative leave while his conduct was reviewed. Nothing dramatic was announced, but everyone understood what it meant. Sharon's legal exposure grew by the day. Fines were issued for unauthorized use of private property. Cease and desist orders followed. Civil liability loomed for harassment and false reporting. Her carefully maintained image as a community leader collapsed into something far less flattering. Socially, the consequences were just as severe. People stopped returning her calls. Invitations dried up. The same neighbors who once echoed her talking points now avoided her entirely. The community that had once nodded along out of fear or convenience was suddenly very interested in distancing itself. Clearwater Ridge Estates elected interim leadership, then permanent replacements. The new board's first action was to issue a written apology to affected property owners and formally acknowledge that the HOA had no authority over my land or the lake. All outstanding notices against me were withdrawn. The inspections stopped. The letters stopped. The late-night posts stopped. For the first time since I inherited the property, the silence felt real. I noticed the change in small ways. I slept through the night without waking to imagine knocks. I stopped checking the driveway every time a car passed. I worked on the dock without worrying. Someone would show up to question me. The lake returned to what it had always been under my grandfather's care: quiet, private, and untouched by politics. Walter came by one evening and sat with me on the porch. We watched the sun set over the water while he told me something that stayed with me. He said the families Sharon had pressured years ago were finally speaking up. One couple admitted they had sold their land at a loss because they could not handle the stress anymore. Another man said he had always known something was wrong, but felt powerless to fight back alone. Seeing Sharon exposed had changed that. They were not weak. They had been isolated. Walter said those families felt vindicated, not because Sharon had lost power, but because the truth was finally public. Their experiences had been real. Their instincts had been right. That mattered more than any fine or investigation. As for Sharon, I did not celebrate her downfall. I did not need to. The system she abused corrected itself the moment it was forced into the light. Without secrecy, intimidation had no oxygen. Life slowly returned to normal. I focused on restoring the property fully. I repaired what had been damaged. I updated boundaries and signage. I formalized access rules exactly as the law allowed. Nothing more. Nothing less. The gate stayed. Not as a symbol of revenge, but as a reminder that boundaries only matter when you enforce them. And every time I walked down to the water, hearing nothing but the breeze and the lake against the dock, I knew something important had shifted. Not just for me, but for everyone who had been told to stay quiet, comply, and accept pressure as normal. They now knew better. So did I. Looking back on everything, the hardest part was not the inspections, the letters, or even the threats. It was how close I came to believing that fighting back was pointless. There were nights when selling and walking away felt like the only way to breathe again. That is exactly what people like Sharon count on. They do not need to be right. They just need you tired, isolated, and afraid enough to quit. What stopped that from happening was not anger. It was patience. It was documentation. It was understanding the law instead of reacting to intimidation. Confidence can be loud, aggressive, and convincing, but it is not the same thing as authority. Real authority lives on paper, in records, in timelines, and in the truth that holds up when someone finally looks closely. The lake is still private. It always was. The gate is still there, closed and legal, exactly where it belongs. And the people who tried to take what was never theirs did not lose in some quiet office or behind closed doors. They lost in front of the very crowd they invited, under cameras they could not control, with documents they could not argue away. I did not win by shouting louder. I won by letting the truth speak when it mattered most. If there is one lesson in all of this, it is simple. Do not panic. Do not assume someone with a clipboard or a title automatically has power over you. Learn your rights. Keep records. And never let a bully convince you that fear is the same thing as law. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?